Everyone in Black Ridge Hollow knew the sound of wolves. Not the distant kind that drifted through the trees at night like a warning carried on the wind, but the closer sound, the one that meant something had crossed the line between wilderness and survival. That winter, the sound came early. Eliza Marrick heard it the first week of November, standing alone behind her cabin with a bucket of frozen water in her hands. She was 73 years old, and she no longer moved quickly enough to pretend she wasn't. The howl came low, strained, not strong like the others she'd heard in her life. Something in it faltered. She stood still, listening. The hills around Black Ridge were already buried under a thin crust of snow, the kind that looked harmless until it hardened overnight and turned the ground into glass. Winter had a way of arriving quietly there, then refusing to leave. Eliza set the bucket down beside the well and straightened her back slowly, one hand pressing against her spine. "That's too close," she murmured to herself. She knew better than to ignore a sound like that, but she also knew better than to go looking. By the time she stepped back inside, the wind had picked up, pushing against the cabin walls with a steady, hollow force. Inside, the fire burned low. She crouched beside it, feeding in another log, watching the flames take hold. The cabin smelled of dry wood and old iron. It had belonged to her husband once. Then it had belonged to both of them. Now it belonged only to her, though she still found herself setting 2 cups on the table some mornings, before remembering. She didn't hear the wolves again that night, but the next morning, the town did. By midday, word had already travelled from one end of Black Ridge to the other. "They're coming down early," Thomas Ivor said outside the general store, pulling his coat tighter around his neck. "I saw tracks near the southern ridge. Big ones." "Driven by hunger," another man added. "It's going to be a hard winter." Eliza stood just inside the doorway, listening without announcing herself. She had never been one for unnecessary conversation, but people spoke more honestly when they didn't know she was there. "They'll start taking livestock next," someone said. "Or worse." There was a pause after that. No one needed to explain what worse meant. Thomas noticed her then and gave a short nod. "You hear them last night?" he asked. Eliza hesitated, then nodded once. "Closer than they should be." "That's what I'm saying," he replied. "If they're coming down this early, something's wrong up there." "Or something's injured," she said quietly. Thomas frowned. "Injured wolves don't come closer to people. They die where they fall." Eliza didn't answer. She stepped back into the cold, pulling the door shut behind her. The wind had sharpened, cutting across her face as she made her way home. She had lived in Black Ridge Hollow for 46 years, long enough to know when something didn't fit. And that howl hadn't. It hadn't been a call. It hadn't been a warning. It had sounded like something breaking. The second night it came again, closer. Eliza woke before dawn, not because of the sound itself, but because of what followed it. Silence. Complete, heavy silence. Even the wind seemed to pause between gusts. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to her own breathing. At her age, waking in the dark came easily. Going back to sleep did not. She sat up slowly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and waited. There it was again. Not a howl this time. A whimper. Soft, barely there. Eliza closed her eyes. "You don't go out in that," she whispered to herself. The temperature had dropped hard overnight. She could feel it even through the walls. This kind of cold didn't just freeze the ground. It took things. Fingers, toes, breath, common sense. She stayed where she was, for a long time. But the sound came again, and this time it wasn't just one. There were smaller noises layered beneath it, thin, weak, persistent. Eliza exhaled slowly, her shoulders sinking. "Damn it," she muttered. She knew that sound. She had heard it once before, decades ago, when her husband had found a stray dog caught in a trap behind their property. It had made the same kind of noise. Not loud enough to demand help, just enough that ignoring it felt like a choice. And she had never been good at pretending she didn't hear things. By the time the sky began to lighten, Eliza was already dressed, layer upon layer, wool, then heavier wool, then her husband's old coat over everything. It hung loose on her now. Everything did. She moved slowly, deliberately, checking each buckle, each button. There was no one there to rush her, no one to stop her either. Before stepping outside, she paused by the door. Her hand rested against the wood for a moment. "They're wolves," she said aloud, as if saying it might change something. It didn't. She opened the door. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and absolute. Her breath turned to frost in front of her face. The ground crunched under her boots as she stepped forward, closing the door behind her. The world was pale and quiet. Snow stretched across the clearing, untouched except for a single set of tracks leading away from the tree line. Eliza followed them with her eyes. They were uneven, not the steady pattern of a healthy animal. Something had dragged. Something had struggled. She stood there longer than she meant to. Then, with a small shake of her head, she started walking. The tracks led towards the edge of the forest. Each step grew more difficult as the snow deepened, rising past her ankles, then her calves. The air burned in her lungs, but she kept moving, because turning back would have been easier, and she didn't trust easy decisions anymore, not after everything that had been lost to them. By the time she reached the tree line, her legs ached and her hands had gone numb inside her gloves. She stopped for a moment, catching her breath, listening. Nothing. Just the faint creak of branches shifting under the weight of snow. She almost turned around then. Almost told herself she'd done enough just by coming this far. But then, a sound. Closer now. Not a howl. Not even a whimper. Just a faint, broken movement against the quiet. Eliza stepped forward into the trees. It didn't take long to find them. They weren't hidden. They couldn't have been. The mother wolf lay half buried in the snow, her body curved protectively around two small shapes pressed against her side. At first, Eliza thought she was already dead. The wolf didn't move, didn't react. Didn't even breathe as far as she could see. The cubs, though, they moved, barely, tiny trembling shifts beneath her fur. Eliza stood frozen in place, her heart beat slow and heavy in her chest. "Well?" she whispered, her voice catching in the cold air. "There you are." The wolf's fur was matted with ice and blood. One of her hind legs lay at an unnatural angle, partially buried beneath the snow. A trap, Eliza thought immediately. Or a fall. It didn't matter which. the result was the same. The cubs made a soft sound, weak, hungry, alive. Eliza took a step closer, then another. The wolf's eye opened, just one, clouded but aware, and it fixed on her. There was no strength in it, no threat, just presence. Eliza stopped, the distance between them no more than a few feet. They stayed like that for a long moment, woman and wolf, both too old in their own ways to pretend this was something it wasn't. "You won't make it out here," Eliza said quietly. The wolf didn't blink. "If I leave you," she continued, her voice softer now, "you'll be gone by nightfall." The wind shifted, carrying a sharper gust through the trees. The cubs pressed closer into their mother's side. Eliza felt it then. Not fear, not exactly. Something heavier. The kind of knowing that doesn't ask permission. "They told me not to interfere," she murmured. Though no one had said it yet. They would. She knew they would. People always did when it came to things like this. Wild things, dangerous things, things better left alone. Eliza let out a slow breath. "I've listened before," she said, "and I remember how that turned out." The wolf's eye remained on her, unmoving, waiting. Eliza looked down at the cubs, then back at the trees behind her. The distance to the cabin suddenly felt much longer than it had before. Her hands trembled slightly, though whether from cold or something else she couldn't tell. "This is a foolish thing," she said. No one argued. Not the wind, not the trees, not even the wolf. Eliza nodded once, as if agreeing with herself. Then she stepped forward. Eliza did not reach for the cubs first. She knew better than that. Even injured, even half frozen, a mother would choose death over letting something take her young. So she stood there, close enough now to see the frost clinging to the wolf's whiskers, close enough to hear the shallow, uneven pull of breath in her chest. "I'm not taking them from you," Eliza said softly. Her voice came out slower than she intended, each word carried carefully, as if tone mattered more than meaning. "I'm trying to keep them alive." The wolf's eye did not leave her. There was something steady in it. Not trust, not yet, but not panic either. That alone told Eliza everything she needed to know. This animal had already used up what little strength she had left. Fighting was no longer an option. Only waiting. Eliza shifted her weight, her boots pressing deeper into the snow. The cold had begun to settle into her bones now, no longer sharp but heavy, like something wrapping around her joints. She ignored it. "You're going to freeze," she said, glancing briefly at the cubs. "They won't last long after you." One of them let out a thin sound, barely more than a breath. Eliza's jaw tightened. She had heard that sound before, too. Not from animals, from people, years ago. A winter that had taken more than it should have. She swallowed the memory before it could settle. There was no room for that here. Not now. Slowly, carefully, she crouched. The movement sent a sharp pull through her knees, but she didn't stop. Every motion had to be deliberate. No sudden shifts, no reaching too fast. She lowered herself until she was almost level with the wolf. "Let me see," she murmured. The wolf's ear twitched.
That was all. But it was something.
Eliza extended one hand, stopping well short of touching, waiting. The wind moved through the trees behind her, a low hush that filled the silence between them. Seconds passed. Then the wolf's head shifted just slightly, not away, not toward, just enough. Eliza exhaled. "All right," she whispered. Her hand moved the rest of the distance. Fur met her fingers, cold, stiff with ice, but beneath it, warmth, faint, fading, still there. "Still holding on," Eliza said. The words were quiet, but they steadied something inside her. She let her hand rest there for a moment longer, feeling the rise and fall of breath. Uneven, too slow. She moved her hand down carefully, following the line of the wolf's body, until she reached the injured leg. The fur there was darker, frozen blood. The limb lay twisted at an angle that made her stomach tighten. "Trap or fall," she muttered again. The bone might be broken, or worse. She had seen injuries like this before. Sometimes they healed. Most times they didn't. Not without help. And even then, Eliza closed her eyes briefly. "This is where I should walk away," she said under her breath. "This is where sense tells me to leave it alone." She opened her eyes. The cubs shifted again. One of them pushed weakly against its mother's side, searching, finding nothing. Eliza let out a slow breath. "I was never very good at sense," she said. The first thing she did was remove her gloves. The cold bit into her skin immediately, sharp and punishing. But she needed her hands, needed to feel what she was doing. She reached inside her coat and pulled out a strip of cloth she had wrapped there before leaving the cabin. Old habit. Preparation without fully admitting what she had intended. "You'll hate this," she said quietly. The wolf's eye flickered. Eliza took that as acknowledgement. Carefully, she brushed away some of the snow packed around the injured leg. The movement drew a low, strained sound from the wolf. Not a growl. Not quite pain. Something in between. "I know," Eliza murmured. "I know." Her fingers worked slowly, loosening the ice where it had formed around the wound. The skin beneath was swollen, angry. There was no clean break visible, but that didn't mean much. The damage ran deeper than what she could see. She wrapped the cloth as best she could, not tight enough to cut off what little circulation remained, but firm enough to hold. It wasn't a fix, just time. A little more time. "That's all I can give you out here," she said. The wolf's breathing hitched, then steadied again. Eliza sat back slightly, flexing her numb fingers. The cold was worse now. She could feel it settling into her wrists. "This won't be enough," she admitted. Not to the wolf, to herself. The truth had been there from the moment she stepped into the trees, but saying it made it heavier. "You'll die here if you stay." The cubs would follow, quickly, quietly, as things often did in winter. Eliza looked back toward the clearing beyond the trees. She could no longer see her cabin, just white. Distance, time, too much of both. Then she looked down at the wolf again, at the cubs, at the shallow rise and fall of breath that was already slowing. And she knew. This was the point, the one people talked about later, when the outcome was already decided. The moment where a person either turned back or stepped further in. "They'll say I should have left you," she said.
Her voice was steady now. "They'll say I don't know what I'm doing." A faint gust of wind moved through the trees, lifting the edge of her coat. "They'll be right." She nodded once, then leaned forward. "Still doesn't change anything." The first cub fit into her hands like something that wasn't meant to survive the cold. Too small, too light. It barely reacted as she lifted it, its body weak against her palms.
Eliza brought it close to her chest immediately, tucking it inside her coat, against the thin layer of warmth her body still held. "There," she whispered. "That's better." The second cub made a faint sound as she reached for it. A protest, or maybe just instinct. She gathered it just as carefully, holding both close, adjusting her coat around them to keep the heat in. The movement drew the wolf's attention. That single eye sharpened slightly. Watching. Eliza met it. "I'm not taking them away," she said again. "I'm taking them where they can live." The wolf didn't move. Couldn't. But something in her gaze shifted. Not trust, not fully, but something that felt like permission or surrender. Eliza swallowed. "I'll come back for you," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. A promise, one she wasn't sure she could keep. The wolf blinked once, slow. Then her eye closed. Not in death, not yet, but in something close to it. Eliza's chest tightened. "Don't do that," she murmured. "Not yet." She adjusted her grip on the cubs, pulling them closer against her body. Their small, fragile warmth pressed against her ribs. It wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to keep moving. Standing up was harder than she expected. Her knees protested immediately, her balance unsteady for a moment as the weight shifted awkwardly in her arms. She tightened her hold, steadying herself. "Easy," she muttered. The world tilted slightly, then settled. She turned back toward the direction she had come from. The tracks were still there, partially filled with snow now, but visible enough. The distance felt longer this time, heavier. Every step mattered now, not just for her. She took one step, then another. The cold bit harder with each movement. The cubs shifted faintly inside her coat. Alive, still alive. "Stay with me," she whispered. She wasn't sure who she was speaking to. Them, the wolf behind her, or herself. She had gone perhaps 20 yards when she heard it. A sound behind her, low, weak, but unmistakable. Eliza stopped, closed her eyes. "Don't," she said quietly. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she did, she knew what would happen. She would go back, try to lift the wolf, fail, lose all three. The sound came again, softer this time, fading. Eliza's hand tightened against the cubs. "I said I'd come back," she whispered. The words felt thin in the cold air, uncertain, but they were all she had. She took another step, then another, each one heavier than the last. By the time she reached the edge of the trees, her legs were shaking. The wind hit her full force again, colder now, sharper. The cabin sat in the distance, small, too far. "Almost," she murmured. The cubs had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Eliza adjusted her coat, pressing them closer, willing warmth into them. "Not yet," she said under her breath. "Not like this." She kept walking, slow, steady, no wasted movement, because there was no extra strength left to waste. And somewhere behind her, in the silent stretch of trees,
A mother wolf lay alone in the snow, waiting. Or not. Eliza didn't let herself think about which. By the time Eliza reached her cabin, she could no longer feel her fingers. Not properly. They responded when she told them to move, but the sensation was dull, distant, like they belonged to someone else, and she was borrowing them for the moment. She fumbled with the door latch, her shoulder pressing against the wood as she tried to steady herself without loosening her grip on the cubs. "Hold on," she whispered, though her voice had begun to thin with the cold. The latch gave. The door opened. And the difference was immediate. Not warmth, not yet, but relief. The kind that came from stepping out of something that had been quietly trying to kill you.
Eliza pushed the door closed behind her with her heel and stood there for a moment, breathing. The cabin felt dim, still, safe in the way only small places can feel safe. She moved towards the fire without wasting time. It had burned low while she was gone, the coals faint beneath a layer of ash. "Of course you did," she muttered. Nothing waited. Nothing held itself ready for her. That had been true for years now. She knelt slowly, careful not to jar what she carried, and used one hand to stir the coals. A faint glow answered. Not much, but enough. She reached for the kindling she kept stacked nearby, breaking it with stiff fingers, feeding it into the pit, one piece at a time. "Come on," she murmured. The flame caught slowly, reluctantly, then grew. Just enough. Eliza exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Good," she said. Only then did she turn her attention to the cubs. She moved to the table, clearing space with the side of her arm, pushing aside a tin cup of folded cloth, a small knife she had left there the night before. Nothing in the cabin had changed, and yet everything felt different now. She opened her coat carefully. The first cub slipped slightly as the cold air touched it, its small body barely reacting. The second remained still. Too still. Eliza's jaw tightened. "No," she said quietly. "Not yet." She lifted them both onto the table, her hands moving faster now despite the stiffness. She grabbed a wool cloth from the chair nearby and wrapped it around them, pressing gently, trying to bring back warmth without shocking them. "Easy," she murmured. "Slow. It has to be slow." She had learned that lesson long ago. Too much heat too quickly could do more harm than the cold itself. The smaller cub made a faint sound, a breath more than a cry. Eliza froze for a moment, then nodded. "There you are," she whispered. The second cub did not move. She reached for it, her fingers pressing lightly against its side. Nothing. Her chest tightened. "No," she said again, sharper this time. She rubbed its body gently through the cloth, working warmth into it the only way she could. Time passed. She didn't know how much. Seconds. Minutes. It stretched. Then a twitch. So small she almost thought she imagined it, but then it came again, a weak, fragile movement beneath her hand. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Don't do that," she murmured, her voice softer now. "Don't leave like that." She adjusted the cloth, bringing both cubs closer together, letting their small bodies share what little heat they had. The fire behind her crackled, growing stronger. The room warmed slowly, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to fight back. Once she was certain they were breathing, both of them, faint but steady, Eliza stood. Her legs protested immediately, a deep ache settling into her knees, her hips. She ignored it. There would be time to feel it later. Or there wouldn't. Either way, it didn't matter now. She crossed to the small shelf near the wall and reached for a bottle. Goat's milk. Thin, but it would have to do. She poured a small amount into a cup, then hesitated. Too cold. She moved back to the fire, holding the cup near the heat, turning it slowly. "Not too fast," she murmured again. Everything required patience. Everything required restraint. It would have been easier to rush, but easier had never been what kept things alive. By the time she returned to the table, the cubs had shifted slightly within the cloth. Not much, but enough to show they were still there, still fighting. Eliza dipped her finger into the warmed milk, then touched it gently to the mouth of the first cub. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, a response. Weak, uncertain, but real. "That's it," she whispered. "Take what you can." She repeated the motion, careful, patient, a drop at a time. The second cub followed more slowly, reluctant, as if it wasn't sure it was worth the effort. Eliza stayed with it longer. "Don't argue with me," she said quietly. "I've carried worse than you." The words came without thought, from somewhere older than the moment. She didn't examine them, didn't need to. The cub took another small amount, then another. Enough, for now. When she finally stepped back, her hands were shaking again. Not from the cold this time. From the effort. From the weight of what she had done and what still remained. Because this was only the beginning. Keeping something alive for an hour was one thing. Keeping it alive through the night, through the week, through the winter, that was something else entirely. Eliza turned her head toward the door, toward the forest beyond it, toward the place she had left the mother. Her expression shifted, not visibly, but something behind her eyes tightened. "You said you'd go back," she murmured. The words sat heavy in the room, unanswered. There were facts she couldn't ignore. The distance, the cold, the condition of the wolf, her own body. 73 years did not move easily through deep snow twice in one day, not without consequence, not without risk. She knew that, better than anyone. And yet, she looked back at the cubs, at the faint rise and fall of their small bodies beneath the cloth. "They won't last without her," she said. The truth of it settled in, clear, unavoidable. Saving them halfway wasn't saving them at all. A knock came at the door, sharp, unexpected. Eliza stiffened. No one came this far out without reason. She moved slowly, wiping her hands against her coat as she approached. Another knock, more insistent. "Eliza," a voice called from outside. "You in there?" Thomas, of course. She opened the door just enough to see him, his face red from the cold, breath thick in the air. "What is it?" she asked. "You heard them again," he said immediately. "Wolves came down near the lower ridge this morning. Took one of Harris's goats." Eliza didn't answer right away. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Not yet. He shifted his weight, glancing past her shoulder into the cabin. "Look," he continued, lowering his voice slightly, "we're organizing a watch, just in case. If they're getting bold this early,
It's not a good sign. Eliza nodded once. That's sensible. Thomas hesitated. Then, you haven't gone near the trees, have you? The question hung there, heavy. Eliza met his gaze. No, she said. This time, it was a lie. A quiet one, but a lie all the same.
Thomas studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. Best keep it that way. Injured wolves are the worst kind. Desperate. Unpredictable. Eliza's grip tightened slightly on the door. I'll remember that. He stepped back, pulling his coat tighter. We'll check in tomorrow, he said. Make sure everything's all right. That won't be necessary. Maybe not, he replied. Still. He gave a short nod, then turned and headed back toward the road, his figure fading into the pale stretch of snow. Eliza watched him go, then closed the door. The cabin felt smaller now, quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. She stood there for a long moment, her hand still resting against the wood. Injured wolves are the worst kind, she repeated softly. Desperate, unpredictable, dangerous. She knew all of that, had always known. It wasn't new information. It was just being said out loud now, given shape, given permission. Eliza turned back toward the table. The cubs lay where she had left them, small, fragile, breathing, alive, for now. She stepped closer, adjusting the cloth slightly, checking them again out of habit more than necessity. Then she straightened. Her eyes moved once more toward the door, toward the distance beyond it, toward the place where a promise had been left behind in the snow. They'll tell me not to go, she said quietly. They already are. Her voice didn't waver, but something underneath it did. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to memory, to the weight of all the times she had listened, and what it had cost. Eliza reached for her coat again, slowly, deliberately. Her fingers worked the buttons with care. Outside, the wind picked up once more, pressing against the cabin like a warning, or a question. She didn't answer it. She had already made her choice, even if she hadn't said it out loud yet. Eliza stepped outside again, before her body could argue with her. The cold met her like something alive this time. Not sharp, just certain, as if it had been waiting. She pulled her coat tighter, though it made little difference now, and followed the faint path she'd left behind. Each step felt heavier than before, not just from the snow, from what she had already decided. There are moments in a life when the decision is made long before the body agrees to it. This was one of them. By the time she reached the trees, her breath had shortened. Her legs trembled in a way she could no longer ignore. Still, she kept going, because she knew something she hadn't known when she was younger. If you turn back from certain things, they don't leave you alone afterward. They stay, quiet, patient, waiting for you to remember. She found the wolf where she had left her, half buried now, snow gathering along her back, softening her shape into something almost part of the ground. For a moment, Eliza thought she was too late. She stood there, not moving, not breathing. Then, a slow rise, barely visible, but enough. There you are, Eliza whispered. The wolf's eye opened again, clouded, tired, but still watching, still here.
"You waited," Eliza said. She didn't know why that mattered, only that it did. She crouched slowly, her joints stiff, her hands already aching before they touched the fur. "I brought them in," she murmured. "They're warm." A pause. "They're alive." The wolf didn't move, but something in her gaze shifted. Not relief, not trust, just less resistance, as if the fight had narrowed to a single, quiet decision, to hold on or not. Eliza slipped her arms beneath the wolf carefully. The body was heavier than it looked, not because of size, because of what it required. Her grip faltered for a second. She adjusted, tried again, lifted. Pain came immediately, sharp through her back, down her arms, settling deep into her chest.
She held still, breathing through it. "This is the part where I should stop," she said quietly. But she didn't. She took a step, then another, slow, uneven, every movement measured. The forest stretched longer than before, the distance wider, the cold deeper. She could feel it now inside her, not just around her, taking, little by little. Her legs shook harder, her arms burned. Once, just once, she nearly slipped. Her boot lost its hold beneath the snow, her body tilting just enough to remind her how quickly this could end. She steadied, waited, then kept going, because stopping would be worse. Stopping meant setting the wolf down, and if she did that, she knew she wouldn't be able to lift her again. Time lost its shape after that. There was only movement, breath, step, breath, step. Nothing else. No past, no future. Just the space between where she was and where she needed to be. When the cabin finally came into view, it didn't feel like relief, just something closer to possible. Eliza didn't rush. She couldn't. She reached the door and leaned against it for a moment, her strength thinning to something fragile. "Almost," she whispered. She pushed it open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The warmth hit differently this time, not comfort, but contrast. She moved to the fire and lowered the wolf down slowly, carefully, as if the ground itself might break her. The wolf didn't resist, didn't react, just lay there, breathing, still breathing. Eliza stood over her for a moment, her hands shaking, her chest rising and falling too fast. Then she turned, grabbed another blanket, and covered her. "There," she murmured. "That's all I've got." The cubs stirred faintly on the table, alive, waiting. Eliza looked between them and the wolf. Then she sank slowly into the chair beside the fire. Her body gave in all at once. The strength she had borrowed, spent. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly. For a long time she didn't move, didn't think, just listened. To the fire, to the wind outside, to the quiet, fragile sound of breathing that now filled the room. 3 of them, still here. "They told me not to," she said softly into the stillness. No one answered. No one needed to. She nodded once, her eyes fixed on the fire, though she wasn't really seeing it. "I've listened before." A pause. Her voice dropped lower. "And I remember what that costs." The wolf's breathing steadied slightly. Not strong, but present. Enough. Eliza leaned back in the chair, her eyes growing heavier now. The room dimmed around her. Not dark, just quiet, settled, like something had reached its end,
without needing to say it. Outside, the cold continued, unchanged, unforgiving. But inside, for now, nothing else was being taken. And that, Eliza thought, was enough.
At least for tonight.